Gotta keep me looking good.
So okay, Rabbi 28b, 7 lines down, maybe 8, 3, 6, 8. Me, Amr, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Achi. So Rabbi Yehuda just said, very interestingly, you have to slaughter not only the 2 pipes by an animal or 1 pipe by a bird, but you have to actually go and do the jugular veins, or the other fancy word you had before. Yeah. Yeah, the carota, yeah, that thing. So, yeah.
I don't know if that's right.
Jules going to give a lesson later on the carotid arteries.
You
have to talk to Donna.
Charles.
Okay. Either way, the jugular veins, we'll call it for that. We'll use that in our vernacular. Amar of Chista. So the question is really why? Why does he require that slaughtering? So Rav Chista says it depends what you're slaughtering. Amar of Chista, Lo Amar Rabbi Yehuda Ela Ba'of Ho V'Tzalo Kuluk Echad Al Behema Came in the Minchasa. Came into Mintacha, Aver, Lo Tzarech. Rabbi Yehuda says, according to Rav Chista, the only time you need the jugular to be slaughtered is when we are talking about a bird, because it gets roasted all at once. But a behema, which goes onto the altar piece by piece, that you don't need to slaughter the jugular. Lememra, is that to say the time of Rabbi Yehuda Mishum Dam? It sounds like the reason for Rabbi Yehuda is because you want to get all the blood out, as much blood as possible. So when you cut those veins, a lot of blood comes out. So when you're putting up the animal on the altar all at once, you want to get as much blood out as possible. When it goes up piece by piece, then the blood flows out much easier. So is that to say that that's Rabbi Yehuda's reasoning? Now we're going to bring a number of proofs that the words don't sound like that's what he's saying. The Hatanan says in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Achi Yishchot Es Avridim. It's until he shechs the vridim. It sounds like it's a halacha in shchita, and you have to actually shecht through, to slaughter through these jugular veins. Says the Gemara, no, read it like this: Ema Achi Nakiv Es Avridim. It's until you puncture the vridim, because all you need is the blood to flow out of the jugular. So you don't have to do actual slaughter. Umay Achi Yishchot I. The Mishnah says until you slaughter it. So what does that mean? Achi Yinkov B'Shash Shchita. What it means is, don't wait until later on to poke a hole in it. Do it now. The blood is warmer and flowing, as opposed to, we'll see later, colder and congealed. Take a Daf Yomi trip to Slaughterhouse to see live presentations. There you go. See who survives. So, yeah. So Tashma, another brisa of Vivridin B'Shchita. It says the jugular veins have to be with shchita. Sounds like you have to do real slaughtering. And who says that? To Rabbi Yehuda, our Rabbi Yehuda. So it sounds like you really have to slaughter it, not just puncture it to get the blood out. Ema v'vridin sarth l'nakvan b'shash shchita to Rabbi Yehuda. You have to read it. What it means is puncture it at the time of slaughtering. At the time of slaughtering is the best time to puncture them, but you don't have to do actual slaughtering. Even a puncturing is fine. What did you say?
What is the reason?
That's your jugular veins.
Oh,
that's the jugular, yeah. You can test it afterwards. Tashma Amrulo, another brisa says, they said to him, Rabbi Yehuda, said, 1 second, Me'achar shel huskru v'vridin, ela lahotzin mehen dam, since all you need to do is get the blood out, and that's all you got to puncture the jugular veins, the vridin, mali b'shchita, mali shelo b'shchita. Why do you require the slaughtering, the getting the blood out at the time of slaughter? Just get the blood out whenever you feel like it. Why is that so necessary? So, but what do you see from the way they asked that question? What do you see that his statement was? That it sounds like right now the Gemara assumes that you're slaughtering the animal, and they're asking him, why do you have to slaughter through the jugular? You could do it at a different time. That implies Rabbi Yehuda holds you have to slaughter through the jugular. That the Gemara says, no, this is how you read it. Haki kamri lo lay. Mali lenakvan b'shashchita, mali lenakvan shol b'shashchita. What they were asking was, why do you have to puncture it at the time of slaughtering the trachea and the esophagus? Why not puncture it at a different time? If all you have to do is get the blood out, make a little hole in it whenever you want, and the blood will come flowing out. And v'hu savar, so he, Rabbi Yehuda holds, b'shashchita asi dam dechayim. At the time of the shchita, the living blood flows. That's when shelo b'shah shchita, Low asidam, it's not going to come as much, as fast, not going to flow as well. Why? The courier, because it's cold and congealed. So, just like the chicken out of the oven, the gravy's there, and put in the fridge, it gets congealed. So, I'm sure everyone knew that already, but the vampire is happier. Good. What did you say? Why? With the gel. Okay. Get solid. Okay. Fine. You win. So, Rabbi Yirmiyah had the following question. Vivridin Rabbi Yehuda Shaha Bahen or Daras Bahen Mahu. According to Rabbi Yehuda, let's say you waited a period of time that you could do a slaughtering, which if you were to wait that long by the trachea or the esophagus would be invalid. Or darasban, you pressed it, as opposed to sounding, as opposed to a shchita. Amar Leha, who Saba, the elder said, Haki Amar Rabbi Elazar, V'Amilah, and some say Amar Leha, who Saba, Rabbi Elazar, and some said that the elder said Rabbi Elazar, Haki Amar Rabbi Yochanan. This Rabbi Yochanan said, Minakvan bekotes behain ksherin. You could puncture it with a thorn, and the jugular and the animal will be kosher. Because all you have to do is just get the blood out. You don't have to do an actual shechita. Tanya Kavaz de Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda is a later sage, but we have a brisa which is earlier supporting him, which is always great. Shachat shnei chatza'e simanim ba'ov pasel. It says that if you shecht the each pipe of the burr, you do half of it. So 2 halves. The 2 halves equal a whole. Ba'ov pasel. No, they don't. You have to do majority of one of them. The ain sarach lamer b'behema, and for sure 2 halves by a behema, by an animal, which require 2 pipes. The 2 halves is not going to do it. 50% of each pipe is not going to cut it. At least for now. We'll see in a second. A different opinion. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ba'of achi yishchot es havesht ve'es havridin. Rabbi Yehuda says that you have to slaughter the esophagus, the es havridin. Thank you. And you have to also cut through the jugular veins. So you see a brisa. So what do you see from the brisa? Where did the brisa state that Rabbi Yehuda has to cut through the vridin, the jugular veins, only by a bird? The brisa is clearly talking about other animals. It says if you do 2 halves by a bird, it's invalid, and for sure by an animal, so it mentions animal. And then when it states the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, what does it say? Be'of, by a bird, until you slaughter the esophagus and the vridin and the jugular. It doesn't say that you have to do the jugular by an animal, only by a bird. And that's what Rav Chisda said, because since a bird is put fully on the altar, you have to get the blood out. So as opposed to an animal, it's cut piece by piece. So you don't. So you see the brisa also differentiates for Rabbi Yehuda between a bird and an animal, and therefore in our Mishnah, when Rabbi Yehuda says you have to slaughter the jugular, it's referring, according to Rav Chisda and the brisa, specifically to a bird, and it does not need a shechita. It can even do a puncture, because the point is to get the living blood, the flowing blood, the warm blood out of there. Okay, that is that. Yeah, you don't have to choose that profession, Jules. It's fine. So I'm sure nowadays they have an efficient way to.
Oh yeah.
One cut does a job well. I'm sure you have to find out. But
then they're waiting in the stuff, cutting, and it's pouring out. More and more is coming. Oh.
It's raining. It's pouring. Has a different understanding. Yeah. So sing that to the kids. Okay. So now we said that a half of the pipe by a bird and half by an animal is not going to be good. Now here we get to some interesting 2 opinions. Itmar, Rav Amar, when it says half, what does it mean? You have to slaughter half, or you can't leave half unslaughtered? Majority, sorry. You have to slaughter the majority, or you can't leave a majority unslaughtered. So if you slaughter 50% of the pipe, what's left over is 50%. So you have not left over a majority unslaughtered. So maybe that's good. Or no, you have to make sure you actually slaughter a majority, and therefore 50% is no good. So that's going to be 2 opinions. Itmar Rav Amar Mechza al Mechza Kit Rov. Half and half is like a majority. That's enough to be a majority. Rav Kahana Amar Mechza al Mechza Einu Kirov. No, half on half is not a majority. A majority means a majority. Rav Amar Mechza al Mechza Kirov. Half and half is like a majority, and because Hachi Amar LeRachman Moshe Lo Tishaya Ruba. When God spoke to Moshe, saying, he said, "Don't leave over a majority unslaughtered." Rav Kahana Amar Mechza al Mechza Einu Kirov. Hachi Amar LeRachman Moshe Shachar Ruba. When Hashem spoke to Moshe, he said, "Why don't you?" He said, "Slaughter." Not why don't you? He said, "Slaughter majority." Majority is 51%, not 50. So those are two opinions. Simin Chatzi Katina Gargaris Pigima. So I don't know, half of Katina is a esophagus that's punctured. So there's a mnemonic for different names of, I think we have 5 or maybe 6 proofs now back and forth to prove these opinions. So let's see. Tanan says our Mishnah. Says our Mishnah. Tanan Chatzi Echad Ba'of Ve'echad Ve'chatzi Ba'behema Shchitaso Psula. If you do half of the pipe by a bird and 1.5 by an animal, your slaughtering is invalid. Now let's plug it into the two opinions. Iyamers Mechza Mechza Kirov. If half and half is like a majority, so Amai Apostle. 1 second. Ha'avid Le'rov. You didn't leave a majority unslaughtered. You did 1.5 of the tubes, so you're good. You're good to go. There's no non-majority that's left over unslaughtered. So to that the Gemara says you're right, but it's still going to be the reason why it's invalid is because it's a rabbinical invalidation. It must be midrabanan. Why would the rabbis make why would they invalidate an animal if the majority has not been left unslaughtered? The majority, there's less than a majority left unslaughtered, which is valid according to the first opinion. So why would the rabbis invalidate such a slaughtering? You're good to go. The answer is, we're worried. It's like too close. You know, if we're going to allow this, then you might think you could do literally less than half of it be slaughtered. And then you would leave more than half unslaughtered, and that would be invalid. So therefore we say, you got to do 2 pipes and 1 pipe, not, half or 1.5. So that was the first attempt at proof, and we got out of it. Amr of Katina Tashma, the Brisa says, Chelku l'shnayim. So now we're going over to the halachas of Tuma and Tahara. So a classic oven was made out of clay. It's earthenware. Earthenware gets contaminated. You have to break it. The question is, how much of a break is considered a break that the oven is no longer usable, right? So Chelku l'shnayim. So you broke the oven into 2 to purify it. But now the 2 halves are exactly equal. So the hein shavin. So shneim are tmeim. Both are still impure. Because which part is the majority? You need a majority of the oven to be broken. But you divide it into half exactly. So you just have 2 exact halves of an oven. So which one is the majority? Where do you see that the majority is broken? We don't see that. Rather, we see half the oven's intact. There's no majority that's broken. So says the Gemara, why are they both tamei? Lefish efshar letzamtzem. It's impossible to get down to the centimeter and tell you if half the oven is broken or not. So all we have is 2 halves of the oven. So as long as you leave a majority of the oven complete, it's not considered a break. So, but we don't know which is the majority. It's just 2 halves. So if you broke 65% of the oven, okay, it's pure now. It's also not usable, but it's pure. So that's the okay. But now let's make the inference is if you were able to figure out exactly to the decimal place how much of the oven is left over, then it sounds like it would be pure. Tahurin, meaning it would be no longer impure. The contamination would go away because it's no longer a usable vessel. So says the Gemara, 1 second. Amai Tahurin, why would it be pure? Zil hacha ikaruba and zil hacha ikaruba. So according to the opinion that says that half and half is like a majority, so you have half in each. You go to half over here, you have a majority of the oven still intact. You go to the majority over here to that half, and you're viewing a half like a majority. So therefore, you have basically the majority on each part. So why should it be impure? You have a majority of an oven intact. You take a tissue box, divide it into two, and if you could get to the decimal point, you would say that it's going to be no longer impure. But one second, to be no longer impure, you need a majority of the oven to be broken. But in this case, you go to each half and you see the majority of the oven is intact because you treat half like a majority. So that's a question on that first opinion that the Gemara says no. Because you can't have two majorities in one vessel. It just doesn't work. You can view these as halachically a half is like a majority when it comes to laws of shchita or things like that. But practically, you need a practical majority of the vessel to be here. And you can't go to each half and say it's a majority. You can't have two majorities. It doesn't make sense. You only have X amount of a vessel here. So that doesn't work. Third attempt. The parts more than the whole. How we know that can't be right? So, Tashma Shakar Chati Gargaris. The Shahaba, you slaughtered half of the esophagus. Trachea. I'll never get half of the trachea. And you slaughtered half of the trachea and you waited the amount of time that you could do another shchita. So the Shahaba, next page, shchita acheres. The Gomra shchita sok sheira. You waited that time and then you finished off the shchita. It's going to be a valid shchita. So you did once again half of the trachea, and then you waited the amount of time it takes to do another shchita, and then you finished off. That we say shchitaso kshera. And the assumption now is that we're talking about an animal, not a bird. So now, the Amers Mechtal Mechza Kirov, like the first opinion, that half of a pipe is like a majority because the halacha was you just can't leave over a majority unslaughtered. So therefore, if you do half and you leave over half, so that's considered that would be considered valid. If that's true, so then you just did a half of the trachea. So half of the trachea is like a majority. So you're good to go. So that, sorry, not you're good to go. Itrafala, it should be a trefa because what did you do? You slaughtered half of the trachea and now you waited. So since half is good, it's like the whole, but you only did the trachea, and we're talking about an animal. You have to do a trachea and an esophagus. So you only did the trachea, half is like the whole, and then you waited. That's that invalidation of waiting, that you waited too long. That would make the animal a trefa because presumably now it's has a vital wound. Its trachea is punctured, but you have to do trachea and esophagus because it's an animal. So basically, in effect, you slaughtered it and given it a fatal wound, and therefore that's going to be invalid. So why does the Brisa tell me that if you finish off after waiting, it's going to be a good shchita? If you hold that half is like a majority, so then you've made the animal into a trefa, and therefore that's not going to be good. So, yeah, says the Gemara, we're talking about a bird, not about a animal. And now, either way you slice it, it's going to be good. Miman avshach. Either opinion is going to agree to this. Both the two opinions that we had earlier, if half is like a whole or not, will agree that in this case it's good. Why? If you like the first opinion that half is like a whole, so ruba. You did half of the trachea of a bird, and you only have to do one of the pipes, and you did half, and half is like a whole, so that's why you're good to go. There's no invalidation. Who cares if you waited? You already finished your shchita. And and if half and half is not like the whole, well then you did nothing. So you didn't do anything. You didn't do a shchita. So either way, a trefa is if you shechted it properly and then it has a fatal wound. If half of a trachea is not considered a shchita, so then that's not considered a trefa. So if you finish it off afterwards, so that would be considered a valid. That would be considered valid. Now, if we're talking about a bird and you do half of the trachea and half is not considered the whole, and you waited, so 1 second. So why don't we view it as it's invalid? You do half of it. Half of it is not considered a valid shchita. So, right. So that's the same as what? Right. That's the same as called a pegima. You have 49 of the pipe is damaged. If you do the last 2%, and that's what finally kills it, you're good to go. So therefore, either opinion is going to hold that this brisa is fine, no problem at all. So Tashma, next attempt. Hare Shahia Chati. Hare Shahaya Chati kind of pagum. The host of Lav Kol Shehu. Oh, we just mentioned this. If you have half of the trachea is going to be damaged. It's punctured, and you now said let's call it 50%, and now you add 1%. Kolshu the gamer shchita sukshera. That's a kosher shchita. Just do 1% of kosher shchita. Now, 1 second. If you hold that half is like a whole, v'amers makza makza kirov. Obviously, treifa havya. You have 50% of the animal of the pipe is invalid, and if half is like a whole, then you have the majority of the pipe has been punctured. That's a treifa, and that's not good. That's a fatal wound already, and that's not good. So that's a question on that opinion. So it should be a proof that a half is not like a whole. Because if the half was like a whole, so now you have a majority of the pipe is going to be invalid. It's considered a treifa. Marava shiny le'inyan treifa. Dibainan rov hanira le'einayim. So we have a qualification now from Rava that a treifa, to be considered a treifa, you need to have a majority that's visible to the eye. 50% might be, in our case, according to that opinion, a halakhic majority, but it's not a clear majority to the eye. It has to be clear to the eye. Yeah. What's the reasoning behind that? I'm not exactly sure. It sounds like the rule of the majority by certain cases requires that it has to be more of a visible majority. But now that we brought in this qualification, we're going to bring now a kal v'chomer, which is going to reject this whole two opinions. Amar le Abaye. Abaye says, 1 second. Velo kol dekenhu is not a kol shekain. Is it not a? No, I can't say kol shekain, but it's another way of saying a kal v'chomer. Why? Uma treifa, a treifa. Dibema shehu mitrafa, an animal to be a treifa that sometimes even the smallest amount is going to cause it to be invalid, such as, let's say, by the esophagus. Even the smallest amount will invalidate it. It will cause it a treifa. So, umat treifa de b'mashu mitrafa, where even a little bit could cause it to be a treifa. So, heicha de be'inan ruba be'inan rov hanir le'inayim. So, a treifa that sometimes even the smallest amount could invalidate it. And yet, when you need a majority, you're very strict. You need a majority that's visible to the eye. So, shchita, a slaughtering, which already is never valid only with a little bit, you always need a majority. Shchita da'ad igaruba lo miskashra, it's not going to be kosher. So, lo kol shekain debein and rov anir le'inayim, is it not? Don't you for sure need a rove that's visible? Meaning, to be considered a treifa, certain cases like the esophagus, we're very, very, I don't know whether it's lenient or strict. We're very, very, it's very, very strict. It's very strict that it's strict, but it's going to be more, I don't know how to say it. There's a stringency that even the smallest amount invalidates, but yet when you need a majority to make it into a treifa, like the trachea is only when the majority of the pipe is punctured, not a little bit. The esophagus is only a little bit. A trachea, you have to have the majority. By that majority, so there we say we're very, very lenient until you have 50%, until you have a visible majority. So 51% and up, it's not considered a treifa. It's considered good. So you're very strict in certain cases, and yet you're much less lenient in other cases.
Really a technical aspect rather than a halacha is following a practical solution. There's nobody sitting there with a pair of calipers to see exactly how much of you put on a bird this big.
Mm-hmm.
How do you
Well, there must be some way to check. You have to check that most of the pipes have been severed. How are you checking?
Well, that's where the visible.
Yeah.
That's where the visible comes in, as opposed to the precise.
Right. Well, the original understanding was that even half, however you knew exactly half.
Well, that's what they're saying. I think that's what they're
It has to be more.
You know, to know that it's more than half,
Mm-hmm.
you got to be able to see that it's more than half. It's not just
right.
If you come with a pair of calipers and whatever, you know,
right.
You know, you can say, okay, yeah, that's half, or that's more or less.
I agree with you. I'm just saying, according to that, then we would never even suggest such an opinion that exactly half should work, because you would say you can never figure out the half.
A lot of
you do half and you pause and then you continue.
So if you do, so that was the debate over here. Yeah. So if you do half, it depends. If you do half of one pipe on a bird, or half of two pipes on an animal, so that was a debate earlier. So now we're saying, though, we're going to reject this whole understanding, because a treifa, where we find that even a little bit in certain cases invalidates, like by the esophagus, and yet by a trachea, when you need a majority, it has to be a majority visible to the eye. So a shchita, which it's a shchita is never good. We're very strict. It's never good until you have a majority, right? Never a little bit works. You always have to have a majority. Whatever majority means, for sure, that majority is going to be at least as good as a treifa. At least as good as a treifa, that's going to have to be the majority visible to the eye. So according to Abaye, I'm saying Rava says strong, and it could be according to Rava, that's how we paskin. But Abaye rejects Rava, and now Abaye has to give a new understanding of what Rav and Rav Kahana are arguing about. So once again, according to Rava, in the world of shchita, you're still going to have two opinions. Is 50% enough or not? Do you need 51 or 50? Rav and Rav Kahana have a debate about that. Treifa, everyone agrees you have to have a majority visible to the eye. Maybe like Steve was saying, because or else how are you ever going to know if it's not good? If it's not good, you have to be able to see it. Fine. So I'm just saying, though, by shchita you somehow know, because even 50% is good according to Rav. So you have to figure out the difference between shchita, how you know, and treifa, how you don't know. That's for you to figure out. So, but according to Abaye says no. When you need a rove, so Steve likes Abaye. Abaye says when you need a rove, a majority, it has to be a majority visible to the eyes, both by shchita and both by treifa. Therefore, Rav and Kahana cannot be arguing about this. So what are we have them on the books as arguing about is half like a whole. So where is that machlokas? Ella de Kuli Alma. Oh, I didn't think about this. This is parsha. I didn't. So the Rav of Kahana Inyan Pesach Itmar. This is parsha of Pesach Sheni, right? So Pesach Sheni, if an individual was impure at the time of the Pesach, he can't bring it. So what do? So you have 30 days later, you can bring it. But what if the majority of the Jewish people were impure, then you can bring it? What's a majority? What's a majority? So the Gemara, I'm talking about a lot of opinions. Majority of a tribe, majority of the tribes. So that's their debate. Itmar. Haresh ha Yisrael Makza Tahara Makza Tameim. The Jewish people were half pure and half impure. So imagine like the guy's like, raise your hand if you're impure. Like one kid raises two hands, messes the whole thing up for everybody. Yeah, like so it's always that kid. So Rav Amar Mechza al Mechza is kirov. Rav says half. A half is like a majority, and if half the Jewish people are impure, that's like the majority is impure. We'll see in a second why. That's like half are impure, and therefore they can bring it now. You don't push them off till Pesach Sheni. Rav Kahana Amar no. Mechza ain't a kirov. Half of the Jewish people being impure is not like a majority, and therefore they're like individuals, and therefore they have to bring it Pesach Sheni a month later. Now, what's the reasoning? What's the time of my time of the Rav? What's the reasoning of Rav? Ish ki yetami lenefesh. Ish nitchev ein tzibor nitchen. It says that a person is pushed away, a person and not a congregation. So Rav holds when half of the people are impure, that's too much to be an individual anymore. We don't view that as a bunch of individuals. We don't view you have a million people and you have 500,000 individuals. Mm-hmm. If 500,000 are in one category, even though it's only half of a million, that's already too much to be viewed as an individual. That's already a group. Once you're a group, so you're no longer in the verse of Ish Nitcha. A man is pushed away to Pesach Sheni and not a congregation. Once you're there, so you're not a majority yet, but you're enough to be considered not an individual. So if you're not an individual, by definition, you can bring the Pesach Sheni. You bring the Pesach Rishon, and you're not pushed away to Pesach Sheni. Says the Mishnah Rov Echad Ba'ov, you have to do a majority of one signed by a bird. Hanina Chad Zimna. The Mishnah already taught this. It seems repetitive. Ruba Shel Echad Kamohu. We said you have to do one by a bird, and then it says you have to do the majority. It said earlier the majority of one is good, right? The Mishnah is repetitive. It says the second line of the Mishnah says Veruba Shel Echad Kamohu. You have to do a majority of the pipe, and then it says the last line of the Mishnah is the majority of one is good by a bird, and majority of two is good by an animal. So that was repetitive. So why did the Mishnah repeat itself? It's saying the same thing twice. Now we're going to have Hakash Pshach Simon, 6-7 opinions, how to understand the Mishnah, how to reconcile this repetition. So, okay, 5 minutes. We can do it. So Amar of Oshia, Chada B'chun, Chada B'kachim. The Mishnah repetitive because it's really two categories. One is by mundane, and one is by the sacrifices. And I need to teach you that in both cases the majority works. Why? V'tzricha, both are necessary. When it comes to Chulin, regular dinner for tonight, there I need to tell you the majority is fine because you don't do the whole thing because you don't need the blood. By an offering, you need the blood, but by a regular animal, you don't need the blood. In fact, right, we salt all the blood out. The blood's not kosher. So aval kachim diladam utzarich, but according to kachim, where you need the blood, you would have thought maybe majority is not enough. You have to do the whole thing. Amalo tizgle beruba adika kule. You have to have the entire thing and not the majority. Now go the other way. V'yashin and kachim mishum diladam utzarich. By kachim, you would think that majority is fine because you think you need a majority and you can't do less than a majority because you need the blood. Aval chulin diladam lo tzarich. You don't need the blood. Ema b'palga sagile. Maybe you think that 50% and not 51 is good to go. So because you don't need any blood, kamash malan. That no, you still have to do a majority. You can't do less than a majority, even by a mundane animal, even for dinner tonight. So that's the first answer. It's referring to two different cases. Now the question is, which is which? Is the first part of the Mishnah Chulin and the second part sacrifices? Or is the first line sacrifices and the last line is referring to dinner tonight? So, hey b'chulin v'hey b'kachim. Today's Tuesday, right? Oh, perfect. Good. Yeah. So, I hope it's not dairy night tonight. A lot of people are going to be upset about that. So, hey chulin, except for the vegans. Hey chulin v'hey b'kachim. So, Amar of Kahana, mistaber reisha b'chulin v'hey b'kachim. The first line of the Mishnah is mundane, and the last part is kachim. How? Why am I saying that? That the first part is regular case by a mundane animal, and the last part is by holy animals. Mimai, what's my proof? Midikatani hashochet. It says one who slaughters. Now, in the beginning of the Mishnah, if the first part of the Mishnah was talking about kachim sacrifices, well, we're talking about birds also. So it shouldn't say hashochet, it should say hamolech mibayilei, one who does malika. The fact that it didn't say malika shows you it's talking about the mundane. Yeah, but guess what? The end of the Mishnah also didn't talk about malika. So elamai sefer bekachim. So why'd you say shchita zok? The shchita is good. You should have said Malikasok Shera. The Malika is good. So there's Malikasok Shera Mibayile. That's how you should have phrased it. So you have no proof that the end of the Mishnah is talking about sacrifices because the beginning of the Mishnah didn't say Malika. Well, guess what? The end of the Mishnah didn't say Malika either. So that's not compelling at all. No, that is compelling. And it's not a problem. Why? Because whenever you have an end of the Mishnah, you could always say it's patterned after the beginning of the Mishnah. Really, it means Malika. Why did it say shchita? Because it was referring to the beginning of the Mishnah. So halokasha, I did the salak min behema, pranami shchita shera. It was talking about an animal and shchita. So it used that phraseology, but not that it's not that it's coming to exclude a malika. No, it just used that phraseology because that's what it was just talking about. So Ella Resha. So now Ella Resha Michti. Let's see. Al Ovkai. Is the ratio of the Mishnah talking about a bird? So if it was talking about a bird, it should say if the beginning was talking about sacrifices, it should have mentioned Hamolik. So Rav Simi Bar Ashi Amar Reisha b'chulin mehacha. He says no. The beginning. 1 second. Right, the beginning of the Mishnah said "Ashochet" by an oath, by a bird, and it should have said "Hamolek." So, yeah, just like the beginning of the Mishnah started off by a bird, so and it mentioned Shchita, so it should have contrasted that, and so it should have said Hamolek and not Hashochet. Fine. So 55. Okay. So it said that one of them is a bird. Now it spoke about one pipe by a bird. Now, if we're talking about kachim, sacrificial offerings, well, one of them is an olas ha'of, a fully consumed bird offering, not a chatas ha'of. The olas ha'of, you have to do 2 of the pipes, not 1 of the pipes. So must be the beginning's talking about regular dinner and not about sacrifices. Elamai seifa b'kachim. What do you want to tell me? At the end of the Mishnah is talking about kachim. It says rov echad ba'of. It says also there majority of 1 of the pipes. Ha'ika olas ha'of. But what about the olas ha'of? The fully consumed bird offering, the b'ayishnei simanim. So elamai seifa. So what's the end of the Mishnah? So sorry. My rov echad. Rov kol echad v'echad. The end of the Mishnah says majority of 1 of the signs means the majority of each one of the pipes. So it's referring to a sacrificial offerings, and it says majority of each one of them. Whether it's a chatas ha'of, you only have to do 1. Whether it's an olas ha'of, you have to do both, and therefore it could be talking about kachim b'dinu. The lisni rov shnayim. It should have really taught majority of both pipes. But the reason why I didn't mention majority of both pipes because you have a chatas which only requires 1 pipe. So this is actually very logical that it says a rov kol echad v'echad. It's referring to majority of each one of the pipes, however many you need. If you need 2, majority of each one. If you need 1, then the majority of 1. But it stays a little bit vague to include both the chatas and the oath. Okay, we'll stop at Rav Papa. Try to be a little more punctual.